It was February 21st, 2023, when I first sat down to watch the movie Frida. Inspired by Salma Hayek's latest Hot Ones interview I had been obsessing over, I figured I needed to get around to it someday, and now was as good a time as any. For the next 123 minutes, I was completely enthralled in this film, which showed the professional and private life of the surrealist Mexican artist Frida Kahlo. As soon as it was over, I scrambled to Letterboxd, left my review, and liked it so much I added it to my 4 favorites section. Then I noticed the other reviews. Stunned by the relatively average median score, I went to go see what other people had to say. At first, there were common criticisms, like the fact that the movie was almost more about Diego than Frida, which I now see, or that the filmmakers didn't give her bi storyline the care it deserved. Also true. However, this was the first film I had seen Salma star in, and I was willing to overlook those things. But quickly, something darker began to emerge. This movie had clearly been marred during its production by something horrifying, which I was completely unaware of. I removed the film from my 4 favorites and thought that would be that. But I wasn't done with it yet, not even close. Over this past year, I have been unable to shake the thought of Frida from my mind. Ever since reading those reviews, I wanted to know more. How did this happen, and to what extent did Harvey Weinstein truly affect this film? How was Salma Hayek affected and changed by this production? How did this situation affect award campaigns? I wanted to know it all. So today I'm going to do just that and take you through the complete history of Frida. Salma Hayek Pinot was born on September 2nd, 1966 in Veracruz, Mexico. She began acting in her early 20s in Mexican soap operas and became famous for her starring role in the soap Teresa. In 1991, she moved to LA and began studying under legendary acting teacher Stella Adler to become a Hollywood actress. However, she quickly learned there just weren't any good roles for Latino women.
They said, there are no parts for Latinas here. What do you want to play, the maid? You're a star, you're a star in Mexico. Why don't you go back to Mexico? And they were not trying to be mean or anything. They were trying to give me good advice. You'll never get a leading role for a Latina. And this is what truly inspired me.
She landed roles in a few big movies like Desperado and Fools Rush In, but still had this desire to play better roles that would do her culture justice. Up until this point, most of her roles essentially typecast her as the sexy, bombshell Latina, putting her in revealing clothing and provocative scenes. She wanted and deserved more complex and nuanced roles for herself and other Latinas. To achieve this, she founded her production company, Ventana Rosa, in 1999, and began workshopping the idea of producing a Frida Kahlo biopic. For almost a decade, there had been several attempts to get a movie like this made, but they never amounted to anything. It all began in the mid-'80s when Nancy Harden, book editor and Hollywood literary agent, heard about a new Frida Kahlo biography written by Hayden Herrera. After dinner with Herrera's agent, Harden was compelled by Frida's story and optioned the rights to the book in 1988. She began workshopping the movie around, trying to get it sold, and apparently was in talks with major actresses like Meryl Streep and Jessica Lange, but no one would commit. At the time, Frida Kahlo was still relatively unknown, and the interest in her story and Latin America as a whole just wasn't there. Gradually, though, the interest began to grow, and by the 90s, everyone was interested in a Frida biopic. In 1991, it almost got going, when New Line brought on director Luis Valdez to make the movie. Laura San Giacomo was cast to star in the film, but when protests emerged after casting a white woman in the role, the project was eventually dropped. Apparently at one point, even Madonna was in talks to star in a Frida movie, inspired after purchasing 2 of Kahlo's works. Suddenly, Harden had a new problem. She said, quote, "There was no interest because nobody had heard of Frida. A few years later, I heard the exact opposite, that there were way too many Frida projects in development, and nobody wanted mine." But she kept trying and eventually got HBO to option the film as a cable TV movie. It languished there for 4 years, unable to find an actress that was big enough to star in the film. Eventually, Harden and her new production partner Liz Speed wrested the film away from HBO and sold it to Trimark. But even then, things were not set in stone. Promisingly, the movie had finally found its star in Salma Hayek, who signed on after the move. But production became sort of up in the air after Jay Polstein, the executive who championed the film, left Trimark. At this point, it seemed the film would be forever doomed to pre-production purgatory. Ultimately, though, it was Salma, through sheer willpower and determination, who got the movie up and running. She said, quote, "My greatest ambition was to tell her story. It became my mission to portray the life of this extraordinary artist and to show my native Mexico in a way that combated stereotypes." Salma secretly took the film to Miramax, Harvey Weinstein's production company, citing the fact that the studio had become a haven where complex and artistic films were made. In the 90s, the studio had gained a reputation as a leader in the independent film boom, producing movies like Paris is Burning, Pulp Fiction, Crying Game, Good Will Hunting, and many more, all while raking in Oscar nominations. She trusted Harvey to give this film the respect it deserved, but she would soon find that was absolutely not the case. Production for Frida began in spring of 2001 and was fraught from the beginning. Weinstein immediately began tormenting Hayek, demanding countless sexual favors which would always be turned down. This would lead to outbursts of rage, which got to the point where Salma recalled him once saying, "I will kill you, don't think I can't." When it became clear to Weinstein he wouldn't have his way, he made production a living nightmare. First, he offered the script, her role, and years of research to another actress. In response, Salma tried to get out of the company altogether, hiring lawyers and claiming Weinstein had agreed to make the movie in bad faith. To avoid any legal ramifications, Weinstein gave Hayek an impossible list of demands to complete within a tight deadline, or he would halt production. Number 1, get a rewrite of the script with no additional payment. Number 2, raise $10 million to finance the film. Number 3, attach an A-list director. And 4, cast 4 of the smaller roles with prominent actors. Miraculously, she managed to pull it off. Edward Norton rewrote the script several times without credit. Her friend and first-time producer, Margaret Perenchio, put up the money. Julie Taymor, best known for her Broadway adaptation of The Lion King, agreed to direct and became Salma's biggest ally on set. And finally, she was able to convince Antonio Banderas, Edward Norton, Ashley Judd, and Geoffrey Rush to star in the film. With the demands met, filming could finally begin. According to Hayek, the sexual harassment stopped, but the rage escalated, and nearly every day herself or Taymor had to stand up to Harvey's demands. Her co-star Alfred Molina echoed this sentiment in recent interviews. He recalled an incident where Weinstein called him to his office. Molina, repeating Weinstein, stated, quote, he said, "Alfred, what the is going on? I've hired the best actors. I've hired Salma Hayek. She's one of the best actors in the world. And what do I see on screen? Nothing but Frida, Frida, Frida." I remember thinking, well, that's the whole point, isn't it? What he was talking about, of course, was she wasn't playing sexy. She wasn't playing this gorgeous Latina, this hot tamale. She was playing Frida. On one particular day, halfway through filming, Salma recalls Harvey turning up on set and complaining about the unibrow, insisting she get rid of the limp Frida walked with, and generally berating her performance. He then asked everyone in the room to step out. He told her the only thing she had going for her was her sex appeal, and since that wasn't present in the movie, he was going to shut it down. He offered one option for continuing, a full frontal nudity sex scene with another woman. This constant push for sexiness wasn't new. Once before, Taymor had to negotiate a scene end in a kiss between Frida and Ashley Judd's character instead of the sex scene Harvey requested. It became clear to Hayek there was no room for negotiation on this front, and so she accepted. They were already 5 weeks into shooting, and after all her efforts, she felt she had a duty to the cast and crew to see this film through, no matter what it took. But this took a heavy toll. She later stated, "In his eyes, I was not an artist. I wasn't even a person. I was a thing. Not a nobody, but a body." The day they were supposed to shoot the scene, Salma had a nervous breakdown. In her words, "My body began to shake uncontrollably. My breath was short, and I began to cry and cry, unable to stop, as if I were throwing up tears." The thought of making a sex scene to please Harvey and his sick fantasies, and the isolation she felt and not being able to express that to anyone, was simply too much. Continuing, she said, "My mind understood that I had to do it, but my body wouldn't stop crying and convulsing. At that point, I started throwing up, while a set frozen still waited to shoot. I had to take a tranquilizer, which eventually stopped the crying but made the vomiting worse. As you can imagine, this was not sexy, but it was the only way I could get through the scene." When filming finally wrapped, Hayek was understandably so emotionally distraught she had to distance herself from the post-production. When the final cut was finished, Weinstein said it wasn't good enough for a theatrical release, and he would send it straight to video. Tamor got him to agree to release in one theater in New York if the film tested with an audience score higher than an 80, yet another massive hurdle as only 10% of movies score this high in first screenings. Incredibly, it scored an 85. Harvey was so enraged he screamed at Tamor in the lobby of the screening and threw a crumpled scorecard at her face while also physically threatening her husband. When he eventually settled, Salma called and convinced him to release in one more theater in LA. Eventually, the film got a wider theatrical release, gaining box office success no one predicted. It can't be overstated how truly awful Weinstein made this production for everyone, but Hayek especially. He went out of his way to effectively break her down into nothing. Recalling her time during production, Salma stated, "It was soul-crushing because, I confess, lost in the fog of a sort of Stockholm syndrome, I wanted him to see me as an artist, not only as a capable actress, but also as somebody who could identify a compelling story and had the vision to tell it in an original way. He made me doubt if I was any good as an actress, but he never succeeded in making me think that the film was not worth making." Even in this statement, you can see her unwavering commitment to getting this story made. Molina could see this commitment too. He went on to say that Hayek, quote, "in spite of all that, made a great movie. In the face of a lot of resistance from Miramax, in terms of the people she wanted in the movie, she stood up against it and fought for everyone, me included. She was loyal to a fault." Her efforts were truly unparalleled, and despite all the obstacles, in the end they would somewhat pay off. Frida ended up grossing $56.3 million worldwide and was received well by critics. The film would go on to receive 4 BAFTA nominations, 2 Golden Globe nominations, and 6 Oscar nominations, including one for Best Actress in all 3 races. But even in this triumph, Hayek could not escape Weinstein. 3 of the 5 Best Actress nominations of that year were from Miramax Productions: Renee Zellweger in Chicago, Nicole Kidman in The Hours, and of course, Salma Hayek for Frida. Overall that year, Miramax would dominate the Oscars, receiving 40 nominations. An LA Times article from that year even referred to the Oscars as the Harveys. Amongst all this success, it gave Weinstein another opportunity to undermine Salma and her performance. Very basically, Weinstein used his power and influence to secure Nicole Kidman's win, getting one last jab in at Hayek in the process. To know more about the Oscar campaign situation specifically, I suggest Be Kind Rewind's video on the topic. Both Zellweger and Kidman would go on to state they were largely spared from Harvey's abuse during this time, and in hindsight, we can see he was clearly more focused on destroying Hayek than these women. And although Weinstein abused many white women during his time, the racial aspect of this situation shouldn't go ignored. It was directly because of her minority status that Weinstein was able to push Salma in the way he did, belittling her merit as an actor and the specifically Mexican story she aimed to tell. Ultimately, the film performed very well, pulling in money from the box office and winning 2 Oscars for Best Makeup and Best Soundtrack. But for Hayek, that same success was not felt. In the initial deal with Miramax, Weinstein had her sign a deal to do several other films with the studio, which she thought would cement her status as a leading Hollywood actress. However, after the film was over, these opportunities never came, and all the films she was obliged to make had her in minor supporting roles. To a certain extent, I think you can see how this whole experience affected her career. Salma really hasn't starred in another prestige film since Frida. This could be for different reasons, maybe the roles just weren't there, or she decided to take her career in another direction. But this whole situation certainly shouldn't be overlooked as a contributing factor. Weinstein undoubtedly left an ugly mark on her legacy. I will tell you that he has released a statement refuting basically all of Hayek's points, but ultimately, it's up to you to decide the truth in that. Before concluding, I can see how after hearing all that, you would think the quality of the movie really suffered under Weinstein. And to a certain extent, it did, with unnecessary gratuity marring the true story being told. However, please don't leave this video with that message alone. The truth is, in my opinion, this movie is still incredible. At the core of this film is a beautiful story about one of the most famous Mexican artists of the 20th century, played by an incredibly talented Mexican actress who fought to see better, richer stories like this be told. The cinematography is absolutely stunning, and the scenes that incorporate the art into a living image are truly unlike anything I have ever seen. I understand the impulse to not watch this movie in defiance of Weinstein, but I would argue we absolutely should watch this movie, at the very least in support of Salma Hayek. It was solely from her Herculean effort that we even have a Frida Kahlo biopic to watch. She alone shepherded the script. She negotiated with the Mexican government to get access to locations that had never been given to anyone in the past, including Frida Kahlo's houses. She personally secured access to Kahlo's paintings by befriending Diego Rivera's longtime lover, Dolores Olmedo. She found the director. She found the funding. She cast the roles. She suffered through so much because she knew this was a story worth telling. Even still today, rich and complex stories for Latina women are few and far between. It's important to see these depictions on screen, and for all its flaws, Frida is one of those rich and complex stories. Additionally, more stories about women in general need to be seen and made. In 2022, women accounted for only 38% of major characters in the top 100 domestic grossing films. Latinas only make up 7% of that, by the way. Additionally, only 7% of these films had more women than men, 8% achieved gender parity, while 85% of films had more men than women. The Hollywood landscape is so utterly male-dominated, and besides the general undervaluing of women, it allows for people like Weinstein to achieve success and go without consequence for so long. It took more than 15 years before any action was truly taken against him. Salma herself said it best, stating, "Until there is equality in our industry, with men and women having the same value in every aspect of it, our community will continue to be a fertile ground for predators." To have all of her efforts effectively erased by Weinstein and leave this movie to be forgotten by time would be yet another way he exerts his power. This movie is so much more than just a product victimized by Harvey Weinstein, and we should recognize it as such. I'll leave Salma with the last word.
It gave me a purpose more than anything. It was not a movie. It meant so much to me. All the things I wanted to complain about in the world or change the perceptions in the world, I could do with this film. And it was important for me to show that my country is full of sophistication and how at that time all the great thinkers around the world would come to Mexico. It just steps out of the stereotypes that were used for all Latin American characters at the time, in the end of the 90s, because remember I was trying to get this done for a very long time. But also, she, like I said, she had the courage to be unique, and I thought that would be inspiring beyond the Latin American community, that her life would be inspiring for every woman and for every man. So it was not just one more movie that I wanted, like, oh, it will be my lead. No, for me, I really felt like it was my destiny to make these, and to do it the right way,